My name is Jumoke Fagbure, and with me we have three very knowledgeable panelists who I'll be introducing very shortly. But before I get started, this is the Oando International Women's Day webinar, and today we'll be discussing gender equality versus gender equity. What do women actually want? So a bit of housekeeping. So if you have any questions, please type them in the Q&A box at the bottom of your screen. We also have a chat box if you'd like to join the conversation and make your comments and meet other members listening. Then also, you can also tweet at us. Our hashtag is Oando IWD webinar, and our Twitter handle is at Oando_PLC. Our Instagram handle is also Oando_PLC, and we're live streaming on YouTube if you'd like to join us on there as well. LinkedIn and Facebook, we also have pages there, and it's Oando PLC. Now, in terms of why is Oando having these conversations, we feel it's important, and it's something we had previously started, but particularly during the when we were on lockdown and when COVID started, and we felt it was important to have these conversations to empower current and future generations, to challenge us all to think differently, whilst also striving to change things and to impact our future. Oando has also been involved in building capacity over the years, and we've worked with communities, universities, tech hubs from the World Economic Forum. Now, back to our topic. As I said, it's equality versus equity. What do women want? And those two words are the very popular words that, that we hear when there are conversations about diversity and inclusion around the world. And why is this conversation important? So I think we all know that gender inequality is a very persistent challenge. Women around the world continue to experience prejudice at work. We remain underrepresented in leadership roles, and we're also underpaid relative to men. And I think it's important to also, outline some figures. So only 6.7% of board chairs are women. 5% of women hold the CEO role. There's a global average of 19.7% of board seats. Just give me a second, please. There's a global average of 19% of board seats which are held by women. Then women serve as elected heads of state or government in just 21 out of 195 countries. And also, in bringing it to Nigeria, only 3.6% of seats in the Senate and the House of Reps are held by women. Now, considering the fact that women actually make up approximately 50%, 49.6% of the world's population, this imbalance is crystal clear. If you've heard my numbers, literally we have 6.7%, 5%, 19.7%. So the imbalance is very clear for a gender that makes up about half of the world's population. So there's clearly an issue here. So today we'll be having a very well-rounded discussion with our panelists on the role of equality and equity in building a world free of bias, stereotype, and discrimination, as well as proactive strategies to achieve gender parity. So now I'm going to introduce our very, very knowledgeable panelists, and I'll start with Mary Moshope Adeyemi, who is the Executive Director, Credit Risk Management at Goldman Sachs, and is also the founder of Visibility UK, which is a UK social first organization working to improve outcomes for Black women in the marketplace through inspiration, coaching, community, and advocacy. Her work has impacted women at top-tier firms, including McKinsey, Bank of America, and Barclays, amongst many others. Then I'd also like to introduce Dr. Nkiru Balom, who is the founder and creative director of the Africa Soft Power Project, a media and events-focused company, and also the managing director of RDL Strategies, which provides market intelligence and stakeholder engagement services to clients around the world. She's also the founder and co-chair of African Women on Board, which is an Africa-led globally focused nonprofit organization that seeks to advance the narratives and improve the realities of women and girls of African heritage around the world. And we're actually partner with AWB today on this program. Then finally, we have Hamzat Lawal, who is the Chief Executive of Connected Development, aka CODE, and he's the founder of Follow the Money, which is the largest Pan-African grassroots data-driven movement which seeks to amplify the voices of marginalized communities and also promote accountability in terms of follow the money, how our public funds being used. He is currently leading a global education campaign to accelerate girls' education and ending girl-child marriages, starting with the Northeast in Nigeria as a Malala Fund education champion. Welcome, everybody, and thank you for joining us.
Great to be here. Thank you for having us.
Fantastic. So we're just going to jump straight into the questions, and I'm going to start with Moshope. As I said, Moshope is an executive director at Goldman Sachs. So Moshope, first question for you. As a young Black woman working in the diaspora, do you feel you have to work twice as hard as the average white male? What do equity and equality look like from that angle? And what would you say as a millennial woman, what do you want, or what do you think millennial women want?
Okay, well, first of all, thank you for having me, but 3 fully loaded questions there. So let me start by saying, you see that statement is a popularly held belief, but I think it's always important to check whether it is actually true. So when I think of sort of my career, like, I don't really believe a lot of people can outwork me, in that I've always been a really hard worker in that sense. But also I've always been quite surrounded by people who equally work just as hard, whether they're women or they're men. So from that perspective, I haven't really seen necessarily a difference in performance based on my experience. But I do recognize what people say when they say that. So if I was going to offer you a different perspective, I would say that women don't necessarily have to work twice as hard. I think they need to work twice as smart. Because what then tends to happen is that we try to replace this sort of our lack of affinity advantage. So, we want to build relationships, but usually the men that sit on the leadership tables. And so it becomes a lot more complicated to do that. And we try to replace that sort of lack of affinity advantage. We try to replace that with what we perceive we can gain or control by a performance advantage. So we say, okay, well, you might have this relationship with this person, but if I can deliver 3 times as hard, then when my paper is on the table, I have enough evidence backing. But I would wish that a lot more of us are really thinking about spending that energy in developing the relationships that mean that people are willing to speak for us at those tables, because it doesn't change. It's always about who you know, not what you know. And that's a lifelong thing, and it hasn't changed yet. So I would definitely say that I haven't felt I've needed to work in terms of perform twice as hard, but I have had to be a lot more strategic. And maybe a lot more calculating in the way I approach, in the projects that I take on. So I don't just do every bit of work. And so a lot of times when we think about the work that women do, you really have to question, is it valuable work? Is it work that's adding to the bottom line? Are you able to really identify, that this piece of work means this, and it's going to the board, or it's going to have really good visibility? Or are you doing what I call office housework? It's all the stuff that nobody else wants to do, but you're keeping yourself busy doing it. But it's not meaningful or valuable. So that's definitely one piece is, we really should move towards doing a lot more valuable work, such that you can really identify the impact that you're making. And then I think to your last question around, like, what do millennial women, I'm kind of at the edge of that group, but I do work with a lot of millennial women. And I would say that really what really sums it up is millennial women want choice. And they want to be free from the burden of expectation. So all of the expectations of what a woman looks like, feels like, sounds like, how they should behave, and all of that. I think millennials generally are just kicking against the goad here and just saying, look, what has happened, but we move forward and we have a certain view. And so when you then see how that plays out in the workplaces, they really want to see themselves represented, at the highest levels. They want not just to be number 2, but they want to be number 1. They want to be the leaders. They want to be on the decision-making table. They want their voices represented. They want, companies and leaders who really care about, gender, both equality and equity, because I think we kind of need both, and we'll get into a little bit more of that later. And they want to really see companies create an ecosystem that really breaks through bias, right? So that's how they choose companies, not by brand name, but by really what companies stand for. They follow leaders that they can believe in, and so on and so forth. So I think the shape of what millennials in general, not just women, are expecting from our government, from our organizations, from our leaders, it's completely changed over the years. And I think that it would it would serve companies really well to pay attention to how that is changing and make those shifts internally as well.
Okay, that's perfect. I love what you said about strategy, because I find like a lot of women work hard, not necessarily work smart. So I think that is something that we can all learn from. And I think that just takes me straight to Nkiru, who is a C-suite woman and who may have had to fight biases for the majority of her career. Please correct me if I'm wrong. What do you think women want, equality or equity? And if you can also even just give us a quick overview of what equality, what you think equality and equity mean, and how that has changed over time.
Thanks, Jumoke, and it was really interesting and refreshing listening to you, Moshope, in terms of your ideating of what you were talking about. And I like the whole conversation that what you were saying about the lack of affinity advantage, and that is why women end up working twice as hard or maybe 3 times as hard. And then obviously then thinking about how to work smarter. And I guess we can talk more about that in terms of navigating situations, but also just considering, I'm in Nigeria, I'm in Lagos, and considering that even with, realizing that there's this affinity advantage and how to navigate that becomes even a problem for women because, like men are having meetings at, 11 o'clock or 12 o'clock. And so, you want to be in that room with them, all of that. And then you're like, okay, what if something happens? They will say, what were you doing there? And so there's so many conversations and so many issues around that. Think about, the way we view a ball and the whole, like men usually have mentors, my ebon, my aburo, all of that stuff is part of, Nigerian context, generally, at least with Yoruba language, that's that, but it's across. And then you're like, okay, when your ebon, who is a senior male, is then saying to you, I like you. Then how do you navigate that as somebody who knows that they require a mentor and a sponsor to actually advance? And so there are really interesting complexities around how women navigate in terms of why we work harder or why we think that we're going to get it by working. Because also in terms of that whole affinity advantage situation, we sort of suffer in that space. We're still suffering, major biases, major issues, because we're not able to engage in the way that, say, a male mentor engages with their mentee, or how sponsors engage, because there's always that whole, for us, for women, many women, the situation is, the mentor then says, what's in it for me? So that's something for us to think about as we engage on this conversation. In terms of equity and equality, I mean, Moshope already answered it. We want both. Equality means that we're equal. We have the same access to everything, equal opportunities at work, equal resources, all of that. But we do know that that's not the case. Majorly, women are sort of like underprivileged, and it's across the world. It's not an Africa issue. And so we know that while we may want equality, we don't have it, where there's a boy preference in many African countries. But again, it's a global problem. Let's not say it's an Africa problem. And so equity means then that you're able to then get the tools that you need to get ahead. And that's the difference between equality and equity. I remember having a conversation with a bank. We were doing strategy for a bank, and they said that they didn't view life with a gender lens, that they treated all their clients the same. And then you then say, how is that possible that you do that? And the example that they gave was that, so for example, when I'm talking about loans, all you need to do is meet the criteria. The criteria means that you provide collateral. Man or woman should provide collateral. But think about it. So if you're a girl child, you're born, let's say you're Igbo in Nigeria, and you're born and you don't inherit property from your dad, because in many cases, women don't inherit. Your brother inherits this, huge piece of land and the property, all of that stuff. And then it's time for this collateral. where is your collateral coming from? Your brother has an advantage over you, which gives them, so at the end, it's not actually equal. Yes, the rules appear that they look like they're applying equally, but they're not, because there's a problem with that situation. So that's sort of an example of equality and equity in terms of how to actually sort of like for people to view those things as they're thinking about it. I feel like that's about what I'll say at this point, so I don't sort of overhug the mic. But I think you talked about a majority of my career in terms of, so I didn't grow up thinking or knowing I was a girl. I grew up just being a human being and knowing that literally everything I wanted, I could get if I read my books and I did well and all of that stuff. So which is what I did. Nobody, my family upbringing was like, you do the same thing. I didn't wash the plates because I didn't wash my brother's plates. That's how I grew up. We did the same thing. You eat, you wash your plates. But it was like now getting into the career space that I was like, oh, there's a problem here. I remember negotiating for money with if the person who I was negotiating, if they hear it, they remember. And this is a senior person, and this was negotiating for increase. And he slipped and said, "What are you going to do with it? What are you going to do with the money? What are you going to do with all that money? Like, it's not like you have a family. This is what, so this is what we hear all the time. And so we obviously have been, in terms of the biases that we have to deal with at work, there's so many, but I think, I'll let you move on and then we can come back to discussing some of these things directly.
Thank you very much, Nkiru, for that example. And I think, and I'm sure actually a lot of women would have heard that kind of thing where they're saying, yeah, you're a woman, what do you need it for? Oh, you're a single woman, why should I rent to you? There's so many biases that people don't even realize like is coming through. But yes, I think again, women sometimes we do have these issues. So yeah, thank you very much for those examples and for talking us through from your perspective. We're going to move on to Hamzat, our soul man on today's panel. And Hamzat, as a man that basically works with organizations that try to break biases, for instance, working with the Malala Fund, and also your work with Follow the Money, which again is not necessarily gender-based, but again is working with people in marginalized communities. What do equity and equality look like in your field?
Well, thank you so much. I feel honored speaking in the midst of amazing women who have done so much and who continue to inspire. So for me, it's about allowing women to be women and not setting an agenda or setting a template for women. Just let women be, let girls be. So equity and equality for me is a society where women can be expressive and would not be judged, where girls can live their life to their full potentials, where they would not have to get married or be forced to get married as girls and become mothers instead of just being girls and making friends and going to school. So for me, this, and what would shape my perspective here is a bit of culture, and when I say culture, and a bit of religion. So sharing experience in northern Nigeria, and maybe also piggyback to what happened during COVID-19. Before COVID-19, when we say that in various communities, underage girls are being forcefully married off, a lot of people would argue that it's not true. But during COVID-19, because of the lockdown, and then because of poverty, so before COVID, we were 80 million people poor. During COVID, over 20 million people became really poor. The workforce, 50% of the workforce, according to MBS data, shows that 50% of the workforce lost their jobs, and people could not be able to provide services, so they didn't have income. So there was a lot of pressure in communities to fend for themselves, and the only way was to prey on girls, giving girls, forcefully giving girls hands in marriages to older people. So we got reports where family members were organizing emergency wedding just to collect bride price and marrying off 12, 14-year-old girls. And sadly, some religious people have also used religion to take away the rights of women and girls from them, and keep, using religion to amplify that, there's nothing like equity or equality, that, they would use religion and say, men is higher than women. And for me, it's really sad and unfortunate. But as an advocate, as a mobilizer, when I engage in this conversation, when I engage, I ask practically, and I think this is where knowledge and information plays a critical role. I would ask, can you show me in the Quran or in the Bible where this is clearly stated? And then they start checking and start saying, oh, according to this scholar. I said, no, show me in the Quran or the Bible, because you, as a religious scholar, is saying that this is backed by the Holy Book. So here are the Holy Books, show me exactly where it is clearly stated. So for me, equality and equity, let women be women, let them have their free will, let them speak their truth, let them experience their humanity and their womanhood, and let's respect them, for what they are and how God has created them. And let's not see women less than how we see ourselves. And I tell people to choose to listen, that women are actually a higher being than men. Yes, I'm a man, and I recognize that women are a higher being because women are natural leaders. And I tell people, if not for women, I would not be here. So don't design or decide women's spaces. The space, and when you look at history, women are the ones that first conquered territories. But because men who are scared and are weak are trying to change history, and they're scared and they keep, trying to force women to take their voices away from them and shrink, spaces and come up with barriers that will limit them in meeting their potential. Thank you.
Thank you very much. I like the perspective you brought, which is a very holistic perspective. It's basically let women be women. Do not discriminate against them. And for people who have used religion as an excuse for discriminating against women, I like the fact that I said, okay, show us where in the Bible, in the Quran, women are supposed to be discriminated against. And I actually like that perspective, and I want to throw out the question to the audience as well. What do we think women want? Do we want equity? Do we want equality? You can put it in the chat box. Let's have a discussion over there. What do we think? What else do we think can make can make things more equal for women? So yes, thank you very much, Hamzat, for that response. Okay, so we're going to move on to our next question, which is for Nkiru, and it's basically saying that according to the World Economic Forum's Global Gender Gap Report in 2021, the time it will take to close the gender gap grew by 36 years in just 12 months due to the COVID-19 pandemic. This means it will now take an estimated 135 years to close the worldwide gender gap between men and women. And at the current pace, it will take 121 years to close the gap in sub-Saharan Africa. That actually sounds very scary, to be honest. So question for you, Nkiru, apart from the pandemic, what would you say are the things that pull us back from making strides towards inclusiveness? And what are the root causes of gender inequality?
Thank you, Jumoke. And Hamzat, that was a really, I was, again, like when I was listening to you and when I was listening to Moshepo as well, I was like, I feel very privileged to be in this session talking with, yourselves. Before I sort of go to that, I guess the answer is also linked in my mind in terms of the unconscious biases, and we'll talk more about that, but I also want to draw from what Hamzat was saying. around, early marriage, child marriage. And for me, that's a root cause of gender inequality. And it's a really serious problem. I was recently speaking about this, I think during maybe 2 weeks ago, because I'd watched a segment on some data which sort of like actually connected child marriage to terrorism. And yes, like really serious. And I'm sure, I don't know if Hamza's seen that, and I'll share that, I can share that with you guys later. But the way they worked it in the Northeast and Northwest of Nigeria. So young girls are getting married at 10, 11, 12. They're marrying, and then there's, they're marrying, so a man marries 4 wives, they're 10, 11, 12. Each young girl can have up to 7, 8 children. And so imagine, and then sometimes they die in childbirth. Remember, they're kids themselves. So because they're kids, they don't have that whole, like they're not mothers yet. So they don't have the natural mothering instinct, all of that. And then they might die, but they too were kids as they were, so they don't know how to take care of children. So it becomes a self-fulfilling prophecy. So these kids are, maybe orphaned, they don't have love, they don't have, father, mother, family to sort of like look out for them. And so there's just a whole bunch of young men, sort of like roaming the streets, and they're very easily taken by extremists who then sort of like tell them all sorts of things, and they don't know what they're doing, and so they then start fighting on behalf of an extremist who's washed their minds because they haven't had love. They're born in poverty, there's no food, their cognitive abilities are not quite as formed as they could be. And so you see that this is a direct link from, I thought this was really an important conversation for Nigerians to have and listen to, because when you're thinking that gender inequality is a women's problem, we're seeing it as a direct link to, it's a societal problem. And if we don't sort of work at it from this point of view, the country is, we see what happened yesterday, or the day before yesterday, from Kaduna to Abuja. This is the beginning, and it's already bad. It's not going to get better. And a core thing that we must be looking at is to how to sort of like fix this gender inequality thing, because it is linking directly to having, bandits on the roads, because kids are not being raised. People are sort of taking on kids and sort of like weaponizing children. And so that's a really serious, for me, really serious issue. And so it was refreshing listening to Hamzat about saying to somebody, where is it written in the Quran? Where is it written in the Bible? That to me is a really refreshing perspective and something we must actually push forward. But again, going back to the question, which is like, what are the root causes? Religion is a core problem, isn't it? We don't like to say it, but it's a really, really serious problem. I would say, again, on record, every street in Nigeria has a church or a mosque. We literally are the most churchiest people in the world. But yeah, look at our country. It's a serious problem. Look at our country. Yet, we all go to church and spend hours in church, whether it's on Sunday, Wednesday, whether you're Catholic, Muslim, all of those things. We're always in a house of worship. But look around us and see what we're seeing. And so that is a core issue, I would say. Culture, we blame everything on culture. But again, is it really our culture? If you talk to the elders, if you talk to people, our elders before Christianity and Islam came in, they said that this is not how it was. We had a respect for women. We had a respect that there was a society respected men the same way it respected women. So some of these things were adopted from the colonizers as well. And so we've mixed some of the bad traditional things with the horrible things that we've taken from the colonizers and mixed it into this whole, it's our culture. It isn't. Our culture doesn't say all of these things. And then, of course, we have the issue of gerontocracy, where you have old people who should be retired. They are the ones in charge, Moshope is laughing, like on a continent where 70% of people, or is it 60% of people are under the age of 30? Come on. So these are the issues that we're facing in terms of what are the root causes? And then we take all of the things that happen to us at home in terms of how we're raised, the whole, women are, women, in church, women should be subservient. At home, the way you're raised, the boy is preferred because they will carry the last name, the women will be married off, all of those things that come into our upbringing and our mindset. we take it to work because it's the same people who are at home who are at work as well. And so the cycle continues. And so these are some of the things that we should be looking at when we're looking at and exploring the incidents and why unconscious biases for Africa might be even more, what's the word? I'll use serious than anywhere else, because there's some really deep-rooted institutional biases that we come with from home, that we take from home into work, and those all play their individual different roles in creating this chaos that we're living in.
Mm-hmm.
Thank you very much for that, Nkiru. I love the fact that you went back to even from home. Like literally, I was having a discussion with someone. I was like saying, yes, the boys are treated differently. Boys can play, girls should be in the kitchen. Like there's this unconscious bias that even from the home it comes from. So of course, men that see that, yes, we're at the top at home, as you said, they'll take it right to work, and it also feeds into that. And of course, religion, which yourself and Hamzat have spoken about. I won't touch on that too much. I see Moshokwe has unmuted. Do you want to add to this?
I was just thinking out loud. I'm going to think out loud now. As Nkiru was talking about even how some of that is perhaps even perpetuated by women ourselves, in that we are the ones who predominantly, as much as we don't want to admit this, we bear the child raising flag, right? We're the ones who, we have a lot more influence on the mind of a child. But, I've been in many rooms where people say, oh, don't do that, you're a lady. And I'm like, no, don't do that. It's not proper. That means it should be the same whether you're a lady or a man. And, you hear a mother say that, and you think, actually, you are the problem. You are part of the problem, because you're already teaching a young girl that her behavior is tempered by her gender. And then just all these things around people wear pink. These are all very, very subtle things, but they really impact like the way you show up when you grow up. Women wear pink, boys wear blue. Women are basically taught to be risk averse as children, and boys are taught to be risky and pushed forward. You're a boy, boys don't cry, go ahead, go and play, go and do all these things. And then you come to work and then you tell a woman to be risky. Workplaces are risky places. They're places where you're supposed to challenge and you're supposed to speak up. But how are you going to do that if you're not naturally brought up to be that way? So I think also, even as women, and as many of the women in this room are thinking about how bias is impacting them, we should also start thinking very much ahead as to how we're raising our kids. Because unfortunately, we are going to raise kids that are going to look exactly like us. If we're not, we need to move away from this whole unconscious bias. Like, let it be conscious. Be aware of the words that we're saying, and bring it to the forefront of our consciousness, that, you cannot say things like that and think it's not going to impact someone. And I was sharing with you yesterday when we were talking that I went to a very prominent private school in Nigeria, girls' school, that used to tell me, women are to be seen and not heard. And I heard that for 6 years straight. But I lived in a household where I was told to share my views. So that's completely it can be quite confusing. And then you grow up and then you start to think, okay, should I talk? Should I not talk? Should I'm a woman, so maybe how should I show up? So I think it really just, we are all thinking about, our own equality and equity in the workplace, but how are we paying it forward? Are we being really conscious about how we're also growing our kids? I think that was just a thought that was coming to mind as Nkiru was speaking.
Thank you very much for that, Moshokbe. In fact, as you gave the pink example, I actually have an example. So I bought a pack. I have 2 boys, and I bought a pack of spoons for them to, take to school. And of course, in the pack of spoons is plastic spoons, different colors, and pink, yellow, blue. And of course, I just used to pick anyone and pack it up for them. And one of my son's teachers actually wrote to me, sent me a message saying, I don't think your son should bring in the pink spoon. And I was like, why? She was like, pink spoons are for girls. I was like, does him using a pink spoon make him any less of a boy? She was like, oh, I'm very sorry, ma. So even in schools, we have to speak to the teachers and make it very clear to them that boys and girls, yes, of course, we're different genders, but we have to treat everyone pretty much the same. Because even people are hearing this in their homes, they're hearing it in school, you're hearing it in church, and then they expect you to grow up and say, oh yes, there's gender equality. It can't work. It literally has to start from the home, from the school, from like raising boys and girls up. So I love the fact that you said that in your family, it was equal, boys, girls, speak up. So I think that is, again, something that we should all learn for the next generation, because I believe they're the ones that we also need to be teaching about this, because we have learned it, but we need to then, pass it on to the next generation. So yes, thank you very much for that. So if anyone has any questions, please type it in the Q&A box. We'll be answering questions later on once we're done with our own questions. So please type in any questions you have in the Q&A box. Thank you. I see that a lot of people are also chatting in the comment box and, giving their own perspective on equity and equality. And Nkira, I think you have an old student also chatting in here, said you taught them about gender and equality. So yes, gender and the law rather. Okay, so we are moving on to our next question now, which is for Hamzat. And we're basically talking about different African countries, and then we're going to bring it home to Nigeria. So just bear with me as I read. So it basically says, Angola enacted legislation criminalizing sexual harassment in employment. Benin removed restrictions on women's employment in construction to work in all the same jobs in the same way as men. Burundi mandated equal remuneration for work of equal value. Sierra Leone made access to credit easier for women by prohibiting gender-based discrimination in financial services. Togo introduced new legislation that now prohibits the dismissal of pregnant workers from work. Okay, so in Nigeria, we do admit that, there have been strides towards inclusiveness in Nigeria. We're not saying Nigeria is all bad, but I think recent events have shown us that we still have quite a way to go. And the two things I'll talk about is there's basically been a gender and equal opportunities bill, which has not been passed in law many, many years after it's been introduced. And then in March of this year, the National Assembly basically rejected a number of bills seeking gender equality for women in Nigeria. So question for you, Hamzat, and of course for the other panelists, once Hamzat is done, if you would like to contribute, how best do we rally governments to adapt sustainable and comprehensive laws in our legal and justice system and create policies that ensure institutions promote gender parity?
Thank you, Jumoke. So when you reeled out the data from all these African countries, what made it happen is not just about leadership. It's about commitment from their political leaders and recognizing the role of women. So let's bring it back home. When you look at INEC's data, over 50% of registered voters with their PVCs are women. When you even practically take samples during elections, when you look at people queuing up, over 70% of people on the queue during election day are women. Now, this month is International Women's Month. My National Assembly shamefully rejected series of legislative bill that seeks to ensure that women's rights are not only protected, but society treats them fairly. I would try not to be emotional now, because I think one reason why sometimes we get it wrong as activists, as campaigners, is because we get emotional and emotions take the better part of us. I can understand the sadness that comes with this decision from the National Assembly. But the truth is, it is now political. What do I mean? So when you look at political parties, the only role set aside is the role of office of the women leader of the party. In short, recently, there were some men who were aspirants and aspiring to contest with a woman for that office. And I'm starting with political parties, so I'm taking us somewhere, because in Nigeria, our constitution does not allow for independent candidacy. So it means you have to run under a platform, which is a political party. And maybe I would even streamline it into the two major parties in Nigeria. And then we move from political party, and then we go to primaries of these elections. And a lot of people say, where are the women that want to aspire into public office? Now, the dynamics are different for women. So if you want to even run as a state legislator, so state House of Assembly, or a federal lawmaker, so House of Rep, or a senator, when you declare your intention, the violence that even comes with you aspiring, or the societal tag that they would give you as a woman, then when you go to these primaries, you have to start dealing with delegates. That's if the political party choose to run an indirect elections. And let's even say you emerge candidate, for the election. I've seen where propaganda is being run against women, saying, religious-wise, any society that allows for women to lead is a doomed society. I've seen it, even on social media. I've heard it on radio. I've seen even people on television make a case why people should not elect women. I wrote an article recently and I said, I was waiting and I was looking forward to Nigeria's female president. And I was deliberate about my article, which was shaped by WinBiz, as Women in Business, who invited me to come and debate, female presidents. And then I was inspired to write that article. And when I wrote the article and I published, a lot of people called me, men called me, who believe in the same religion and faith as I, and was questioning my resolve and perspective to write and even make a case for Nigeria to have a female president. Some other people on social media even sent me DM and attacked me personally that this would never happen in Nigeria's history. I think as men who are feminists or he for she campaigners, and as women, we must understand that this is political. So if we want to see things done different, I think we need to start putting our money where our mouth is. Because who becomes your representative, both at the local, the state, and the national level, would determine what becomes the issues that we're passionate about. So if we're passionate about issues around equity and equality, what is our candidates as we go into 2023 election? Are they the issues that they're also concerned about? What are their ideals? What are their perspectives and their commitment towards gender equality? See, political party would come and say that as if any woman wants to run, it's either some would say 50% of the form, they would have 50% waiver. Some would even say the form is free. It goes beyond that. I think we need to start building a mass mobilization of citizens that are informed, that are organized, and that are willing to also contribute towards this kind of change we want to see. Because this change must first start politically. And I say politically deliberately because if I say let's even go back to our house unit, we've lost sight and we're losing values as the day goes by. So if we can get it right politically and put more women in public position, both elective and appointive, and ensure that men that are going into politics, that were elected into position of authority, are men that has interest of gender and has it embedded in their DNA. Because if we continue like this with advocacy, with campaigns, yes, I give it up, shout out to women who literally shut down the National Assembly and air their grievances and got lawmakers to even recruit themselves with 3 of these bills, which they are still stalling to deliberate on and revote on. We must take it from a political point of view. And this is an election season. We cannot shy away from it. Yes, I know some of us are professionals or business people, we're academians. We always say, let's leave politics for politicians. But leaving politics for politicians is what got us to this point where we are. Each and every one of us must become politicians. I believe if we are politicians as professionals, we bring a new dynamic and a new shift into politics. And that's why I'm for power shift. Power must shift from men to women. If we really want to see change, if power does not shift, maybe Jumoke, you bring us again after 2 years to come and talk about these issues. And for power to shift, we must also shift ourselves to the grassroots, go to the hinterland and speak local Yoruba, Igbo, Hausa, the language they understand, and educate them and use those words to inspire them to understand that, see, in the eyes of INEC and our permanent voters card, because right now in Nigeria, the only form of equity is PVCO, because even our president has only one vote. You and I on this Zoom call, all of us here, we have only one vote. So that is equity. That is justice on its own. So we can use this language and this communication to ensure that we can mobilize that kind of equity we want to see, but make it more political. When it becomes political, then we can start seeing action. Yes, I know that, institutions and corporations now have, gender policies. Connected Development, my organization, even have a feminist policy. Today, we have 75% of management. We have 80% on our board. On the entire staff, we have 80% female. And these are deliberate. But this is just one institution. We're talking about power, authority, influence. That is political. And we must start to engage in those kind of conversation.
Thank you very, very much for that. And as you were speaking, what came to mind was, as you said, if it doesn't change now, in 2 years' time, we're going to come back and be having the exact same conversation. We all know that we're having elections next year. But for me, realistically, is this something that can be changed as early as next year? Because we all know how politics works. It's turn by turn. You've done your own time now. I've been here longest. It's my turn next. Women we've not fed into that, that system where we're getting close to the front. So do we think things can change in the very near future? I don't know okay, Hamza, do you want to answer? Yeah.
Okay.
Yes.
Things can change.
Okay, but how?
Things can change. First, we must believe, we must invest that change. Numbers, politics is numbers. Yeah. Women already have the numbers. Mm-hmm. So what it means is we can use the number to get a seat on the table and start the change. 2023 is the power shifts. 2027 is the game changer. Mm-hmm. But again, it's not it's not just, it's a marathon. We must continue. So after 2023, we cannot just go and sit down. No, we must continue and consolidate our various efforts. 2027, I believe we can have a president, but we must start by showing that power using numbers, and women have the numbers when you look at data and when you look at statistics.
Yeah, I agree with you totally. I agree. Nkuru Mushokba, do you want to add to what Hamza has said? Okay.
I guess my question though is the fact that we have this battalion of female voters doesn't necessarily mean that they are willing to vote in a woman. I don't think that those two things are necessarily correlated. So it would be actually good to get Hamza's view on that, because I also think that even when you think back to the days of the suffragettes, right? Most women thought they were mad. So in many ways, there are times when we see these movements, but actually a lot of the people who are standing in the way of those who are making that change are women themselves, because the picture of leadership in some woman's mind is always going to be male. It's just the way it's set up. And what we're trying to do is really change beliefs and shift that picture. So then you see, but I don't know that, so to your question, and my view is I don't think it happens overnight. I think you see the data, you see the shifts, you pick on the Angela Merkels and the Jacinthas of the world and see how their leadership is different from their male counterparts. We see that, but we have so many blockades in our midst, whether it's religion, it's culture, it's the way our system is set up, the way our government policies that still prohibit a lot of things for women across certain industries and in politics and in economics and the like. But I think that the journey is long because the problem is deep, right? So it'll be interesting to see. I mean, we're all here, we have our voting cards, they're ready to go. But ultimately, the point is, I always ask this question, like, do we just vote for a woman because we're trying to see that female leadership in the seat, or do we vote for the person that we think is the right person for the seat? Because I don't know that in Nigeria we can afford to just vote for anybody because of gender. I think we have many problems. But those are sort of my perspectives on the matter.
So I can definitely come in and add. So I do see your point, Moshope, but on this one, I definitely agree with Hamzat in terms of, I think I personally don't have a problem with voting for women for the sake of being a woman. Just because like the whole idea that merit, and when people say, oh, are they qualified? Or can they do the job? But we see that the men are not doing the job. They're very ill qualified. The whole example, because when Nigeria, we'll talk about Nigeria, we'll use Nigeria as an example, and everybody, once you say woman, everybody points the Ziani at you and says, oh, look at what happened. I'm sorry, that single woman destroyed the whole of Nigeria, like just her. What was happening before her, what's been happening after her. In terms of the Nigeria situation, things I don't think have been, this bad. And we see corruption it's gone crazy. And we're still saying, come on. So I would actually vote for women for the sake of being a woman. But, and we're not saying women are better. It's just that if we're all bad, let's be bad together. Women are as bad as men. So we shouldn't be on there's no higher level. We're not claiming to be better. And I recently learned that as a way of thinking about it. I'm not better than a man. I'm just saying, since you're there, me too, I can be there to do the same nonsense that you're doing. So let's do the nonsense together. Why must we be better? That's one angle of looking at it. But, and that's just me being myself and being, but going to the point that Hamza was making about the one thing that we do have that we could explore is voting and having this PVC. We've done a lot of work at African Women on Board around women as voters. And we think that is one area that we have not explored as a country and as politicians, because imagine, they say women women will vote for and will not necessarily vote for women, they'll vote for men. So we actually don't mind. I don't mind voting for a guy who does what they're supposed to do. So imagine if you're a politician and you understood the power of the female vote. So I don't think even, Moshope was talking about Angela Merkel and all of those people, fine, but we don't even need them. What we do need to do is to get into the woman's mindset and say to her, look at your children, see what's happening to them. They don't have education. They're not going to school. They don't have, it's becoming hopeless for them. If you elect me as president, will change that for you. Hold me accountable and then see what will happen. Forget about that plate of rice. People are so hungry. That's why we're selling our votes for rice. But if we go and campaign on the point that I will change your life, even if it's free education, whatever it is, and you can hold me accountable and we can mobilize as women, it's possible, as Hamza is saying, and by 2027, that will be the game changer. We don't need to have a woman in power. Honestly, I will vote for a woman president, but for me, it's not about woman president. It is literally who is going to do this job effectively, who is going to change the lives of, Nigerian women and Nigerian men, because it's a suffering for all. It's just that women are suffering more, but we're all suffering more. So that's the point. I feel like, the whole gender thing is a very serious thing. I would vote for a woman president tomorrow, yesterday. But again, women control votes. We just need to understand our power. And that's what I think Hamza was talking about in terms of understanding that power. We all have one PVC. And if we all used it effectively, we could actually really be a force to be reckoned with, whether we vote for a man or a woman. But imagine the power. Once you recognize your agency, then you can move things. That's, just a bit of, my context from the perspective of Moshope and Hamza, what you're talking about.
Yes, I think that's a great perspective. Everyone recognizing that their one vote actually matters, because I think that's a lot of it's something that people struggle with. They're like, it's just one vote. What does it matter? They're already going to do what they're going to do anyways. You already know who's going to win. So I think it's, again, women particularly are recognizing that there is strength in that one card. But again, just to take it back to, I still think there's an issue, because you said you will vote for a woman, because she's a woman. And honestly, you're changing my perspective, because before I said, no, I'll vote for the people or the person that I think, can do the job well. But you said, let's even get the women in there and see what they can do, because the men are getting in there, right? Let's see what they can do. But the problem is that, where are the female candidates? That's the issue. We don't have female candidates now. No one right now is willing to stick their neck out, because I think Hamzat said earlier, say, who are you? Why are you here? As in, why would we vote for you? You're a woman. So I think, again, yes, going from the grassroots is important, but also recognizing the women that will go and stand and say, okay, I want, to get into the primaries, I want to be voted for, is also looking for those women, because we can't vote for women if they're not even, on the ballot paper. So yes, so that's just a point I wanted to make. Thank you very much for that. Okay, so we're moving on to our next question, and we're looking at equality from the workplace perspective. So when it comes to implementing systemic change in equity, diversity, and inclusion within an organization, we all know that the leaders play an important role, because if the leaders show that there's gender equality, if they actually push gender equality in the organization, then that helps everyone. So in order to see meaningful cultural change, executives need to be involved, and they need to move beyond words and actually move into action. So Moshope, this is for you. What strategies can leaders implement to break the bias in the workplace? You obviously, through your visibility, you work with a number of organizations. What have you seen that organizations have done that has actually changed the narrative or changed the story within the organization? So, yes.
Absolutely. No, it's a fantastic question, and one that I spend a lot of time, helping organizations answer. So I'll put it this way. I think it always, first of all, obviously starts from understanding the issues and investing in the remedy. So be that however we want to put it, when you look at the curve of leadership, it tends to be male, especially in certain industries in particular. It does tend to be male. We do have a good number of female leaders, but they might not be the head honcho, or they might be the number 2 or whatever, but they're influential enough to have a seat on the table. But I think, those who are driving change and who are the decision makers need to understand what the issue is. When we're having conversations like this, a lot of people approach conversations like this almost from the, there's a skepticism to the conversation. A lot of men think that the conversation around this equity and equality is supposed to or intended to displace them, as opposed to improve everything for everyone. So there's sort of this negativity bias. Whenever we have this conversation, it's like, oh my God, even when I was coming here, we posted it on my family group, and then one of my cousins kind of said, oh, when we're having this conversation, make sure you say that there should also be equality and equity in paying the bills. So it's this mindset that when we're having a conversation about this, is, what does this, if you get equality and equity in the workplace, what does that mean for life outside of work? Does that mean that, yeah, women should also foot some of the bills, do all those things? You can't expect to, earn more and be, in leadership position, and then that doesn't reflect in the way our society views women, and so on and so forth. So I think just approaching the issue, with an open mind, knowing that it's not a question of displacing men, but around, really creating a sort of even barrier. There's this picture, I'm not sure if people have seen it, but please put it in the chat if you have. If you search equality and equity, there's this picture of a man standing and looking over a fence, and the fence is basically your thresholds and all the things you have to bypass. And then a woman is standing next, and equity means she's given a stool. Not just being that, because she's shorter or whatever, she needs more support to see above the fence. And it's just that picture to say that we're all trying to get above the fence, but the guy can do it because he's naturally just taller and stuff. And I think that's the picture we're trying to take in the workplace. So definitely, when I work with companies, I always like, be aware of, where the biases come from, encourage learning, open conversations like these in big groups, in small groups, external and internal conversations. Make sure you are having, even like sort of, I guess, cross-mentoring relationships. So where women are mentoring men, because I find that it's usually the other way around. So making sure that you're seeing things from women's perspective, ask questions and be willing to ask questions, not to debate, but to understand. It's a big difference when you're kind of waiting to speak as opposed to actually I'm listening. And I find that when there's a perspective that changes when a man perhaps gets married, and in particular when they have daughters, there's something that happens to their brain where they're like, now I see it. because the problem is now in their face. The problem is now their problem, because they now realize that if we continue to live in this world, it's going to impact the children that they so care and love, right? So I think there's an openness that comes with that, but let's not wait for that to happen before we kind of, are generally open. And also for our female leaders, I think sometimes, when there's sort of this, there can only be one mentality, when you get into the room and then you think that, oh, now I'm here, there can only be one, so there's no space. Or we think that because I'm a female leader, I cannot show bias, or I can't be found to favor another woman. But how else does it work? How else does it work? Because it's that affinity advantage that I talked about. The way our workplace is shaped today is because men hired men. It's because Igbos hired Igbos and Hausas hired Hausas. And so women hire women. It's a thing. My entire team right now, I lead a tech investing team at Goldman. My entire team is all women. And maybe in some ways not by design, but because I'm the lead, I think we understand I'm the one that's hiring them. So, again, I wouldn't turn down, a really capable guy, but it just happened that my team was women, but I can also see how that could change if the people who were interviewing were different, of a different gender. So yeah, so definitely, understand the issues, invest in remedy. And I'll say the second piece would be really examine where bias and gather data. We cannot change what we don't measure. And we cannot and whatever we measure gets done effectively. So one of the things that I've seen is actually start gathering data of, at different levels. How do we recruit? At what point in careers do women leave the workplace? And do they come back? Why do they leave? Not just like let them go hire someone else. At what point do they stay too long in a role? Why don't they get promoted? Why was the other person promoted? Really having those open conversations around, that, and even setting up panels that really track women's, recruitment, retention, progression within the workplace, because we need to be having questions at that level. And then I think I would say, really create accountability. A lot of times we just say, oh, we want to achieve this, but we don't actually circle back, where are the results? So you see what has moved the needle at companies is at a government level and a charter level, having numbers. When we started having things like the gender, the women in finance charter, the race at work charter, speaking about, race in the workplace, when we started having things like, you need to hit a certain percentage by X. We have that with women on boards as a global sort of thing. When we start having numbers that force compliance, and people are coming back to say, where are your results? That's where things change, because it can no longer be by mouth. A few years ago, we had something in the UK called the pay gap. That put a mirror in front of everybody's face, because people say, oh yeah, we all get paid equally. But when they brought the results out and you looked at the average pay scale of a man versus a woman, wildly different. And people now had to justify and say, oh yeah, it's because there are more lower paid assistants that are women versus higher paid professionals that are men. And so everything averages out. But it now brings the question, why are there not women who are being paid, the 6-figure, 7-figure salaries? So I think the moment you have accountability on your data and you know that you're trying to hit something, and we have charters that are really trying to make sure that there's compliance broadly, I think things really, really start to change. So yeah, so just those three things, again, I would say is, make sure you're understanding the issues and you're really, really investing in the remedy. You're examining, the second thing would be that you're examining bias and gathering data. And then the third piece is like we keep accountability at the forefront of things. We ensure we're reporting the work that we're doing. We're saying, we were at 12% at this level, we're now at 15%, we're moving towards 40%. Like, what does that number look like? Because I think as we start moving towards compliance, it's clear that the work is being done. And it will not always look immediate. It will not always look immediately like what we want. There will be failures. There will be the woman in the seat didn't do as well as you think she should have done or whatever. But that's all part of the teething issues. We will, as Nkuru said, we will all fail together, but it's fine. Let them be there. And then we keep it moving. And that's how people grow. And that's how we close this sort of representation, leadership, and aspiration gap that we see. Hopefully that was clear.
Very, very clear. I like what you said about if you don't have the data, then how do you measure it? If you don't even record it and keep track of it, then how do you measure it? Because as you said, we can have these conversations, but if practical steps are not taken after, then we're basically going to remain exactly where we are. Nkuru, did you want to say something? I thought, yeah. Okay.
Not necessarily, but I could.
Okay.
So yes, I enjoyed listening to Moshope, what she was talking about in terms of data and in terms of how to effectively move the needle. And I mean, again, I think this I learned this from the current US ambassador to Nigeria, and she said, I mean, we are as bad as each other. So what we need to do is to be in the room. And that really changed my perspective in terms of this whole idea that we had to be smarter, work harder. And if once we get in, we'll show the men how it's done. And that's, for me, that's totally changed. It literally is, I'm just as good as you are. That's it. I'm not better than you. I'm literally just as good as you are. So I'm not going to show you how better to do it. It's just like, let's, be there together. And that's, resonated when Moshope was talking. But in terms of, I mean, I would sort of say in terms of how do you move the needle as well, I think maybe just also working on this mindset shift that we're talking about, but not specifically in terms of individual unconscious biases, but also what is the role of, if you look at the whole conversation around gender equality, it's been left to sort of government and the development space. And I think why I would say congrats and thank you to an Oando is because we have to start shifting the conversation to private sector. And once private sector understands that this is a serious issue for their bottom line, it becomes, we'll see action. So when you look at what happened during COVID, we see how in Nigeria, for example, everybody sat up. It was literally the private sector that moved the needle with all of the things, putting things together. And so I think, and that's what we're doing at IDWB, working very strategically with the private sector and saying, let's move this gender thing from a development world speak, because, to private sector, once is development, is social issues, women, it's just women matter. It's not that relevant. It's not that serious. But when we make it a serious business issue, you see how change begins immediately. Oando was in the room and one of our partners when we launched the Safety in the Workplace program. And it was probably one of the most effective things that in terms of getting thought leaders in the room, both men and women, to actually say enough is enough. Imagine if we do more of that, when men are standing up, the same as women saying, you know what, this can't be, this is not proper anymore. And it's moving a little bit to the ideas around this unconscious biases, now moving back to the individual. When you think about when men say to you that, and Moshope, you did give an example of, men have daughters. And, but I'll turn it a little bit. They say, I love my daughters. And they'll say, I love my wife. And they'll say, I have 3 sisters. And that is actually, I think, a key reason why unconscious bias continues to happen. Because when people think that they have 3 sisters, and so they're fair, when it now comes to sharing your father's property equally, you don't remember that you have sisters. Suddenly your sisters become your enemy. So you see that having 3 sisters is not quite what it's cut out to be. And when it comes to having your daughters, you're the same man who is saying to your daughter, you must get married at 12 or 13. But I love my daughters. So when it comes to you, it's not really that straightforward. That's why it's called unconscious bias, right? And so that's some way of thinking about it to our mind. One of the reasons that we must move and change the perception of gender is that we've been focusing trainings and gatherings on women. Women are talking to women. And so how about we change it up and men start talking to men about why this is a serious issue? Then the trainings will not be focused on getting us women to do better, to work harder, to be more educated, to know how to approach, to know how to negotiate differently, to know, how to navigate, to know how to do the affinity clinical, to know all of these things that we must know to be able to engage these men. Maybe we shouldn't even be bothered. It should be, how should men engage differently? Because it is a serious issue and directly impacts their bottom line. If you know you're going to lose your house as a man, you sit up. So forget about having your sister, your daughter, your wife, loving them all. That's nice. But let's now make it a serious, when they know it's business or they might die, like COVID, everybody, it was no longer CSR. We're all wear your mask. So that's sort of my thinking around how to sort of move the conversation to shift this mindset that we have been engaging on when it comes to gender inequality on the continent.
I think that's fantastic. Saying, basically, you need to personalize it for people, because if it's also it's happening to those people, or yes, I have a sister, it's the same way. So I have Black friends. It's that same idea. Like when we personalize it, then people sit up and they're like, yeah, what can we do? So this actually takes me to a question that we got in the chat box, and it's from Osai Ojiho. I hope I pronounced that properly. And he or she basically says, it is important for people to know how biases and stereotypes create differential treatment, and what policies and practices we need to put in place intentionally to counter negative narratives about women and girl abilities. Hamzat, I don't know if you'll be able to take that question. I can repeat it.
Yeah, please repeat the question.
Okay, so Osai basically says, he or she wants to know how so basically we don't want to know how biases and stereotypes create differential treatment, and what policies and practices we need to put in place intentionally to counter negative narratives about women and girls' abilities.
Oh, thank you. 2 or 3 examples I would try to give. The first one was, and this example is me experiencing it, because these biases are there, but it takes a conscious effort to unlearn them and recognize that they're actually there. So anytime I go out on a date, and even if it's my wife that is taking me out on a date, the waiter would bring the bill to me. Even if, so again, when you sit with your spouse, they greet you, they don't greet your spouse. So if you're not conscious, you won't even recognize that this waiter is only saying hello to you. One, because the waiter think you're the one who has the more economic power and who would pay for the bill here. So sometimes you have to then call and say, oh, but you didn't say hi to my wife. And then, oh, sorry, I was carried away. And then when they bring the bill, I'm like, okay, give it to my wife. Because again, if you don't do this, this would continue. And then when you do it, they feel embarrassed. And I think I've seen some restaurants who have, and then I talk to their manager and say, why is this things happening like this? And then they invest consciously and train their staff to do this. Another was when we had the community gathering, and I asked one of my female colleagues to moderate the event. One of the chief of the community came to me and said, traditional wise, this was wrong for a woman to chair a meeting and moderate. And I said, this is my organization's meeting, even if it's happening in your community and with your community stakeholders. If you would not allow her moderate and chair this meeting, I would leave with our intervention and find another community that is more accommodating. And then he was sad and he sat down. After the event, one of the feedback he gave me, another audience, was, I wish my daughter grows up and be like this lady who have moderated and chaired this event. And later, because I am petty, I called him by the side and I said, if I had not allowed her and done what you have told me, would you know that this girl, or would you have prayed that your daughter becomes like this girl? So I'm telling him that left something in his head that probably would now make him understand that, see, we must create an environment to allow women, or for women to showcase, their talent, their capacity, and their skills. And lastly, I'm really happy, and sometimes in my bedroom, I jump when I see that CEOs of leading financial institutions are now women. I think one thing we've not deliberately done right is even documenting their successes and continue to create platform for them to tell us how they're steering the financial sector during an economic crisis, because they're brilliantly doing very well when you look at some of their profit margin and when they publish, their accounts at the end of the year. So these are just 3 quick examples that that I can use to respond to my sister Osai, who is the country director of Amnesty International in Nigeria.
Great. I didn't even know there was a connection, and the question came straight to you. I like that when you said because I'm petty, you went back to make the point, and hopefully things his mind again is a mindset issue. People's mindsets need to change. As in, why should you say a woman should not chair a meeting? I like that. It's a mindset shift and a mindset change. Okay, so another question that we got from Isaac Lawal, who basically says, you cannot outlaw religions. We cannot restart the world. We cannot undo the damage that has been done to many women, many who have been stained to be inferior and have taken inferior jobs and tasks. Looking circumspectly at the issue, please, what is the way out? It's quite a general question, but yes, but what is the way out of this? Out of women being, who would like to take the question? Nkiru, would you like to take the question?
I mean, I think that's what we've been talking about the whole session. It's such a broad question, but I think the way out is these conversations. I think just having a clear strategy around, taking it, as I said, not making it a women's issue, this whole Ministry of Women's Affairs and all. I think when people hear women's issue, like, you don't, we at AWB, we're writing a report on why women's issues are not serious issues, because if you think about it traditionally, think about period. Like, when women are on their period, men don't engage. And so if women's issues is like, oh, it's for women, like they go into the kitchen, just thinking about all of those things, they're not things that men seriously engage on, because they're not even, maybe they feel they're not even wanted. So we have to also rethink the strategy, even the language around gender and how we see it. We put it in the CSR box. We all of those things are how we would be, and that's what we've been Hamza talked about it, and Moshe has talked about it. I think that the whole conversation has been about that, but I'm going to sort of segue a little bit to touch on a point in terms of what Moshe was talking about around active things to do when it comes to changing conversations. And so when you think about Nigeria, or just generally everywhere, when you think about drivers, recruitment policy, it's not just senior people that we're talking about. There's lower down the cadre of people. There's drivers. How many women drivers have we seen working for companies? And why is that? It didn't occur to us until we started doing this report around how do you engage private sector. Because generally we think, that's an example of unconscious biases, that women don't know how to drive. And that is just something that we all grew up with. Like, oh, I remember you're being driven somewhere, there's a bad driver in front of you. The person will be like, this bloody woman. And then you go and look and it's actually a man who's driving, and the person like, oh, well, he's having a bad day, And so why do we have all men drivers? And why are women secretaries? Why are we not, when we're putting out recruitment, we're recruiting as companies, do we actually say, men and women applicants welcome when it comes to drivers? Would you employ a female driver? And why not? Like, are they driving you at 3 a.m.? It's 9 to 6. If it's a company job, it's maybe 9 to 6. Some people have two drivers. So why don't you have a woman driving in the afternoon? So there's just so many things that we can be thinking about. It's not a removed issue. The thing is really, if you turn left, turn right, it's everywhere. So these unconscious things that we do, starting to unbundle them. There's so many things going on that we don't, even I was like, would I recruit a woman driver? I was like, so we are all guilty of it in many different ways and we don't know it. And so like engaging, so to answer the question that came from me was like having these conversations, understanding, and as Moshepa said, measuring. Data is one of the things we lack the most on the continent. Like there's never any data when it comes to Africa. So beginning to sort of like collect data to measure the impact, and so that we can actually know how to move things. Without data, we can't really do much. And so for me, that's a summary of how, hopefully to answer the question.
Yes, I think that covers it. I think unconscious bias is something that we all face. It's something that we constantly have to tell ourselves, why are there no female drivers? In fact, you see some people, if an Uber comes and they see the driver is a female, they literally decline the trip and try to get another person. Again, it's that unconscious bias that we don't even realize that, that we do ourselves. So it's even trying to understand that in the first place, and then working to, to unlearn the unconscious bias. I think that is what is important. And I wanted to mention, Nonso Onwuzu made a very good point. He says we must keep talking about these issues. We must keep educating and re-educating ourselves and our neighbors. And in this regard, he's challenging and encouraging everyone here today to speak to at least one person outside of this gathering about these issues. And I think, yes, if we have these conversations outside of, this structured webinar, series, for instance, I think that is something that will change things. If we all say, okay, I will speak to one person about this, and we have these open conversations, I think, again, that is what, that is what will shift the needle. Okay, so we're almost, okay, Moshope, go ahead.
I'll just also like to I think sometimes we talk about, I understand that bias can be unconscious, but I also think a lot of times bias is just conscious. We know this is the case. So as you said, I may not have thought about the point about female. I've never thought about it before, actually. I've never thought about it before. Why are all the drivers in our house male? And then I remember one day booking an Uber, and the driver got there and it was a woman. And I think I just paused for a minute, not because I thought I just thought, I don't think I've ever been in a car with a female Uber. I just thought, oh, wow. And we had a great conversation and all of that stuff. And it was fantastic, but I left there feeling quite impacted by that. But if I had had the choice and I'd seen the picture and then I declined the ride, that's conscious. That's not unconscious. So I think there's always this threshold of, I don't know, to and I think the challenge for all of us is to bring bias into our consciousness. So if we're going to do anything after this meeting is, take some time with your favorite drink, sit down and actually write down some of the beliefs you have about certain things, about why certain things are. A good one is sort of this driver piece, but, what are some of the things? Ask yourself a question. As a man, can I actually report into a woman? If you've never done it, really ask that honestly and think, what problem might you have about that? Bring that bias into your consciousness, and then you are now able to start addressing it. I think we get so much of a pass by just saying, oh, it's unconscious, but it is conscious, and the same goes for ethnicity, tribe. There's so many sort of aspects of that we kind of, I think we get a bit of a pass just saying, no, it's just unconscious bias, but no, we know where the line is, or at least we should. And then, if you bring it into your consciousness, you're able to say, okay, I know I would naturally do this with a Yoruba person. I feel more comfortable because we have language, we have understanding, we have this, we have that, we have that. There are many people in this room that will never marry out of their tribe. That is a conscious bias. It's not an unconscious bias. It's a conscious bias. So address the fact that you can bring things into your consciousness and then start dealing with it as to why do you have those? What are the damaging effects of actually holding on to that bias? What's the opportunity cost of holding on to that bias? And let's start giving ourselves a pass on the unconscious piece, because I think, unfortunately, it gets us into more trouble than we think.
Thanks, Moshope. I think you're very right. There's unconscious, which most people say is unconscious, but there's actually conscious bias. Like, people may not recognize that it is, but it is, conscious bias. So yes, thank you for highlighting that. Okay. So just a very quick note as we're wrapping up, we have about 6 more minutes. So I just wanted to quickly talk about, the human. So basically in April 2021, when we went into lockdown, the humans of Oando basically came together to form what we call TAP, which is the aggregator platform. And it's a body which seeks to connect charities with people in need, because we find that there are charities in Nigeria, but they are not reaching the grassroots communities, the people that actually need the funds and the food. So basically what we did is we worked with a number of charities to basically connect them with people that required food. And so how it works is that, the humans of Oando, the employees of Oando actually donate to TAP, and then using those funds, we then, allocate to different charities who then go to certain communities. And, that is something that has impacted, communities and women and children. And it's something that we're very proud of. So if you'd like to join us in eradicating hunger in Nigeria, one community at a time, please visit www.tap2reachall. I will say that again, tap2reachall.org. Then we're also on Twitter and Instagram at tap to reach all. Actually, we'll just put it in the chat box so that everyone can see that actually. Okay, yeah, great. It's been put there. So yes. So final questions for our panelists. It's a general question. We have 4 minutes, so you all have about 1 minute each. How do we achieve inclusiveness? Through equality, through equity, or both? Although I think everyone has actually touched on this, but you can just, give your final thoughts on this as we wrap up. We'll start with Hamzat.
Well, the Sustainable Development Goal team is leaving no one behind. So for us to achieve inclusiveness, we must ensure and invest in deliberately ensuring that we leave no one behind. Be them women, men, people with disability, blind, deaf, partially impaired people. Inclusion, it's ensuring that their voices are heard. Mm-hmm. So it's not about, ensuring their voices are heard, but then the majority, have the other of the day known. It's ensuring that there's equity, there's equality, and there's some sense of justice. Because inclusion would actually help us solve most of our social crises in communities today.
Thank you very much for that, Hamzat. Inkiru, would you like to go next, please? You're muted. Okay.
Yeah, I just realized I was typing something into the chat. So I'll just keep it simple and say how treat people. If we all treated ourselves, let's go back to the scriptures. If we all treated ourselves how we want others to treat us, we'll be there. So man or woman, if we like literally just did that, and for people who are religious and for people who are not, I think that's how we would get there. Just put yourself in the person's shoes and walk in those shoes, and you'll see the difference that will make to you, whether it is conscious or unconscious. Once you actually put yourself and walk in people's shoes, I think what's that book? To Kill a Mockingbird. It said you will never know how someone feels unless you walk in their skin. So if you do that, I think that would be, if we have the mind capacity to do that, I think that would sort of solve all the problems. But can we really? But that's a question for another conversation.
Certainly, it's not easy. Everyone thinks they can until they're actually in that position. So I like what you said, put yourself in someone's shoes, in someone's skin, and that would help with inclusiveness. And last but by no means least, Moshope, please.
Oh, very great anecdotes, leave no one behind, walk in other's skin. I mean, I would say, the concept of diversity is about saying everyone is welcome. The concept of inclusiveness is about saying everyone is important. And I think kind of keeping that in mind as we do everything, whether it's at politics, economic level, our firms, in our homes, is just making sure that we give space for everyone to show up and bring their thoughts to the table, and for decisions to be sort of well-rounded. We've had this conversation of equity or equality, and I hope we move to equity and equality, because I think there's just so much space for both, and the import is there. So we can bring the conversations around equality and have conversations with men and make sure like men actually creating space. We have policies and practices that suggest that a woman is no better, a woman is no worse or better than a man, and we all kind of have space. But we also need to keep the conversation around, let's not forget the disadvantage that exists and where that disadvantage is coming from, and then how do we intentionally level the playing field. And that's where the conversation of equity comes in, is there has to be some kind of intervention. We're not going to get to equal by just saying everything, because we're already in a minus, right? There's already sort of that inequality that exists. So there has to be definitely intervention, and that's the conversation that we're having. And so yes, I think everywhere, and I cannot say enough like how it starts from home. We cannot have equal partnership in the workplace if we don't have equal partnership in the home, and that's on both ends. So whether it is a woman cannot finish from work and then go and do another job at home, right? So men also have to kind of step up to this whole like family home caring thing, the same way women need to financially also be there for their family and all of those things. I think we also need to check what partnership at home looks like, as well as sort of partnership in economic fronts. But yes, that's sort of my thoughts on that.
Thank you very much, Moshope. I love the fact you've taken it right back to, again, charity begins at home. We start from the home and then we take it outside. So I think that's a perfect way to end this session. So I'd just like to say a huge, huge thank you to the panelists. We have Nkiru, Moshope, and Hamzat. Thank you for your thoughts today. I've learned a lot today, and I'm hoping it's something that we can take out and also try to influence everyone and chat to other people about this. And I also I don't just want to say thank you for being here today. I also want to thank you for the work you're doing outside with your different organizations. Honestly, I don't know if you hear it enough, but we appreciate you and the work you're doing through your different organizations, because that is what will make a difference. And people have to step in and do that. And thank you for being, those people that actually push gender equality, gender parity in Nigeria and around the world. So thank you very much for that. And of course, I want to say thank you very much to the audience, for listening, for putting in your comments in the chat box, your questions. We really appreciate you. We couldn't have been speaking to ourselves. So, thank you very much for participating, and I'm hoping you've learned a lot. And again, I'll say thank you for the Oando team in the background. You don't see them, but a lot of work was done by them, putting this together. So I just want to appreciate, the Oando corporate comms team and the IT team for all the work that was done on this session. So I think on that note, we can wrap up, and everyone enjoy the rest of your day. Have a fantastic day. All right then.